Just be the Bhutto, the witness, and what I say, how it affects you, so that you can actually use the situation. Sometimes what I say might be confusing, or you disagree, or you agree, or you confuse, whatever, but be aware, So this is direct practice, being that which is aware. When I speak, my voice and the words I use and intonation all has its effect on your consciousness. And that's just the way it is, when we listen to somebody else, and the language, the words, the emphasis, the intonation, the accent, and whatever, it has its effect on, on how we, reaction, emotional reaction, or interest, or aversion arise. And so with mindfulness meditation, one is just, establishing this sense of being the knowing, being that which is knowing, rather than trying to figure, to just follow the reactions that you might be experiencing. So in this, there's the knowing, and then the reactive, emotional reactions of what I say affects you is like this. Whether it's positive, negative, confused, or inspiring, or whatever it is, and the way it is, or it's like this, is using language to point to what we're feeling. It's not defining it or judging it in any way. So this enigmatic way of talking the way it is, as is, in Pali, you have the word dattada, which means it's very difficult to translate into English, but this is generally what it means, is that which is aware now, the way it is. I remember in my early years of interest in Buddhism was through the Japanese Zen Buddhism as it was translated in the 1950s in America. And they talked about suchness, and I couldn't quite figure that one out, suchness. But then that kind of way of speaking is pointing, using language to point rather than to define or describe. Now this morning, what I tried to do is set a kind of attitude. I'm more interested in encouraging you towards an attitude that is conducive towards insight. The techniques we might use, particular meditation techniques, they can be used, and they're quite useful if we have the right attitude. But just meditation techniques on their own without the right attitude can, be very confusing and disappointing for us. So this one-day retreat here is to try to encourage you towards an attitude that I particularly found conducive towards reflection on Dhamma, understanding Dhamma. Now, this word Dhamma is, in English, I see it's the reality. It means what's true, what's real, the way it is. So, then mindfulness is like awakening to reality, the real, rather than the delusions or the illusions that we create. So the conditioned realm is about illusion and delusion. So this is recognized that the societies we live in are basically deluded with their illusions. And that's why, as probably Australia seems like a very pleasant country to live in, but still, its basic, its leadership and its population is still deluded, as is every other country. And so this is just pointing out that what's considered the real world is an illusion. What reality is this knowing. It's the Dhamma, or this word, the truth. None of these words really have the power of the Pali word Dhamma. So that's why we have to almost take it into the English language, use it as an English word, because we don't have an English equivalent that has the same power, same effect as this particular Pali word Dhamma. So what is the right attitude towards meditation? And this, of course, is an attitude, like today, as this particular religious convention, Theravada Buddhism, we have this Sila, Samadhi, Panya, we have Dana, Sila, Bhavana, these kind of teachings of establishing, like generosity, Dana, is a kind of basis for happiness in life, self-respect, happiness, and joy in selfless giving. It's not about quid pro quo kind of relationships. It's the idea of dana is giving without asking for something in return. And of course, when there is unselfish giving, it's a kind of joyful reality that we experience. Getting out of our own particular, selfish demands and self-interest, we give, and that's generosity. Real dana is giving without the intention of gaining a reward or even acknowledgement for it. And then sila is when you ask for the sila, it's about taking responsibility for how you conduct your life in terms of action and speech. So like the 5 precepts or the 8 precepts is something that is good to use on days like this, and you can, or make a commitment to being an anagarika or whatever, but it's a form, a renunciate form, where you are kind of consciously saying, I'm relinquishing all these other things that lead towards worldly distractions and delusions for the sake of this day of mindfulness. And 5 precepts, of course, is for the lay community as a standard. It's a guideline, boundaries for action and speech. Skillful ways of living, where you assume you take responsibility for how you live with your family, how you live with your friends in the society, how we relate to the society we're living in. So it's about non-violence and honesty and use of using our language skillfully, and not being promiscuous, adulterous, irresponsible with our sexual tendencies. And it's also, to refrain from getting addicted to drugs and substances where we lose mindfulness. We can't be mindful. We're just obsessed with some kind of getting the next hit. And so we don't encourage that as a way towards happiness in the world. When in Thailand, for example, Ajahn Chah would say for the lay people who weren't interested in bhavana or meditation, he said, if you want worldly happiness, if you want to live a happy life in the world, then dana sila is the way to do it. The first 2, generosity and morality. And then, if you really want to if you really see or feel have this world weariness and see that happiness in the world is very fleeting and very, you can't count on it, and you have this some kind of intuitive sense of something beyond, then bhavana, or cultivation of mindfulness is the way towards liberation from delusion. So I note that, like at Amaravati in England, monastery where I live, on a Sunday, every Sunday there's a lot of people coming. It's the Thais, Sinhalese, Cambodians, Lao people that live in the UK, and then of course British and Europeans. So on that day, Sunday, usually every Sunday, there's enormous amount of dana, like today, choosing, having all that food as an offering. And so on Sundays, it's like a banquet. It's not like just food dropped in an alms bowl. It's all the best food brought and offered. And there's a sense of joy in that. And for the British, it's because this is not a part of the European cultural experience. It affects the Europeans very strongly because of the kind of joyfulness that, say, the Thais and Sinhalese have in offering dana to the monks and nuns. So that is that's quite impressive to people whose culture is doesn't include dana in the same way. Because on a Sunday morning it can be confusing. There's a lot of noise, children running around and everything, and some monks and nuns get very, I can't meditate when there's all that noise. That's one way of looking at it, very selfish, you're ruining my peacefulness, or to participate in the joyfulness of the generosity that's generated towards us so that we can practice meditation, be free from delusion. I found this way of thinking is very, beautiful. It makes me happy to think of you all offering food, coming today to hear the Dhamma, but also not just to get some kind of meditation lessons, but also with the intention of offering in this traditional style, because for the past 40 years or more, I've lived on this dana. It's the only way that Buddhist monks can survive. And so it's allowed me the freedom and opportunity to explore Dhamma in a way I probably wouldn't have if I hadn't become a bhikkhu. So I appreciate that the feeling of gratitude arises for the support of the lay communities that give us this opportunity to live in this very impeccable, lovely way as a Buddhist samana. So the attitude then is not about, the selfish attitude is me and my practice. Like when I first started practicing meditation, I was doing it from a very willful place, from my ego, from this attitude of I want to get somewhere, get something, get the jhanas, get the stages, become a stream enterer, attain and achieve, get rid of my defilements, and then I would, and of course being a monk in Thailand, you can take a lot for granted because people are very supportive of our endeavors to do so. But coming from this very self-centered view, me as a willful personality trying to get something, the reflective quality was lost, and of course, it took a while to begin to see through this attitude of this, because this is culturally conditioned attitude. I'm brought up in a society where the self is the greatest thing that we have. In fact, when I first came across the word anatta, I said, that's one thing I'm sure is that I have a self. Anicca and dukkha I could see, no problem, but anatta, one thing I'm sure of is that I'm here, I'm me, I'm this person. Because it never been questioned, there's never been even hinted at that I was anything else but this body and this personality. Then through the power of vipassana meditation, where you're no longer just operating from the self-view anymore, me trying to get something, attain something, achieve something, trying to get rid of defilements, kill the kilesas, purify the mind. It's a light of like imperatives from above, but it becomes very willful. And this is where it's worth listening to, listening to yourself think. Because I have, ability to understand language, concepts and so forth, but then the ability to listen and listen to the ego operating. Because I could easily grasp, the idea of not being selfish. I didn't want to be selfish. It's never been, even in the American context, the ideal of not being selfish is very important. So you felt you shouldn't be selfish. Selfishness is bad. When you want to intimidate anybody, you say you're being selfish. If they don't do what you want, it's a good way to intimidate monks and nuns. When they don't do what you want, you say you're being selfish. And then nobody wants to be selfish. And but selfishness is not something you can just discard, but recognize. What is selfishness? And it's based on the illusion that I am these conditions. And then these conditions become my identity, and I'm trying to protect them. I'm trying to, I see everything as a challenge of I've got to get something, I've got to prove myself, I've got to become something I'm not, I've got to get rid of the faults, the flaws, the defects, the impurities, and on like that. So the self is, even with the intention of not being selfish, one can be, quite selfish. And that's where listening to the self. Now, the first fetter that blinds us to the path is the Sakkaya Ditthi in Pali, which means translated as personality view, or they call it the ego or whatever. But it's this sense of a self, of me and mine. And so then, because I come from an idealistic background, I can attach to ideals concepts of how things should be, how I should be, how you should be. And so I could even see the monastic life, as I was experiencing it with Luang Por Chah in Thailand, from this Sakkaya Ditthi level. Like I should be selfless, bhikkhu, I should have metta for all sentient beings. It's full of this sense of I shouldn't be, heedless, I should be mindful. It's full of these imperatives. The ego will always construct, no matter what, this imperative form of demand or command. And then we are conditioned with that. You're brought up in societies that use reward and punishment as a way of training you, making you conform to the laws of the land and the attitudes of your group. So you're rewarded for obeying the laws and punished for not. So that's how the personality, the Sakyaditi, is conditioned. Like meditating really, a lot. I used to think sitting for hours and concentrating, and that I should be rewarded for, being so dedicated to practice. And so I kept looking for a reward for dedicating so many hours to sitting practice. There was, a feeling of a good bhikkhu should be absolutely pure in the Vinaya. So you've got to learn all these rules, not only 227 in the Patimokkha, but also so many others. And on the Sakyaditi level, you never feel you're quite good enough. You're never pure enough or precise enough. There's always a room for doubt about your purity, according to Vinaya, on the Sakyaditi level. So the attitude then is from, to see Sakyaditi, rather than to just try to make Sakyaditi into some kind of ideal Buddhist monk, which you'll never succeed at doing. You begin to listen to, like I would deliberately, intentionally listen to my ego and all it said in whatever way. It said good things or bad things, foolish, wicked things, or whatever it was saying at the time, I listened to. And listening in the sense of non-judging, just recognizing. Because as soon as you judge, if you have a bad thought, and say an angry thought, or a selfish thought, or a violent thought, then the tendency is I shouldn't think that if you're a Buddhist monk. Because Buddhist monks should be full of compassion. And so that's the ideal of a Buddhist monk. But we're not trying to work from that level of idealism, but using the convention for awareness, awakened awareness, and investigation of Dhamma. So in Wat Pah Pong, this was, I thought, one of Luang Por Chah's skillful ways of teaching me, of helping me, even before I could understand any of his talks. His first year, I didn't really understand much of what he was saying, but the way he could get me to look at my suffering, the way not to tell me I should just be a good monk and scold me when I'm not, but there was this movement always towards getting me to look at what I'm doing, what is suffering, and the causes of suffering. So this doesn't take a lot of, explanation and analysis. It's just a matter of reminding oneself and getting the right attitude, having the right attitude. So listening to myself, this story in one of my books about, washing Ajahn Chah's feet, because, this, and the custom was in those days, Ajahn Chah would come back from Bindabat, and then there'd be about 20 monks rush out to wash his feet. And so I thought, this is American thinking. He doesn't need me to wash his feet. He got 20 monks, more than enough. I don't need to do this. This is how American disciples would probably see it. And of course, it's reasonable, isn't it? He didn't need me to wash his feet if he had 20 others doing it. And he only has 2 feet. And they're not big like mine, it's like small ones. So, I could reason it out and felt justified in not making any moves. So I'd sit there in the dining hall. But also I felt peeved, I felt this, these people, they just rush out and, he doesn't need that many. And I was going on like that, complaining and kind of grumbling to myself, not to anyone else. And then one day one of the monks says, Sumedho, you should go and wash Ajahn Chah's feet. And I thought, he's got 20 monks out there or more, he doesn't need me. And so then I began listening. I began to listen to myself grumbling and saying, he's got 20 monks, he doesn't need me. And by listening to my complaining, grumbling reactions, begin to listen to it, I suddenly saw that I'm suffering. That I'm suffering because I'm sitting there grumbling to myself. I didn't dare complain to the others because they'd go and tell Ajahn Chah. So I tried to look like I was meditating. But once I really saw the suffering of grumbling, I suddenly, the next morning I got up and rushed out to wash Ajahn Chah's feet. There was no suffering in that. That wasn't suffering at all. And so this is an example of learning to listen, not to be just intimidated, on the ego level of like, I should do this, it's a duty of a good disciple to do this, and then out of intimidation and out of duty, that would still be Sakkaya Ditthi. See? But because I actually saw, by listening to my grumbling, complaining mind, conceit, and the suffering, that I was actually sitting there in the dining hall suffering over this, when actually doing it was non-suffering. And it gave me kind of joy, because suddenly I just, I didn't think I made that much of an improvement on washing Ajahn Chah's feet. It certainly was an improvement in my mental state, and to see the difference between suffering and non-suffering. Well, that's and many examples like that I had in those early years with Luang Por Chah, where, the ego would, and being very reasonable, rational, sensible, but in this way of justifying and judging and criticizing the tradition or the monks or the way things were done. And it's through listening to this grumbling that I saw, the suffering of being attached to my own views, my own values, what I think is necessary and what I like and don't like. Listening to the Sakkaya Ditthi, then I could begin to not fear it so much. I began to allow things into consciousness that before I wouldn't allow. Now, in my when I was growing up, I wanted to be considered an intelligent, mature person. And so any kind of nonsensical, stupid thoughts or anything, I guess, were just pushed aside. So then, I wanted to present myself and believe in myself as a well-educated, intelligent person, mature person. That was the image I tried to create for myself and what I tried to project outward to the others. And then through the power of the meditation, suddenly when you stop trying to play roles and control everything according to your habits and your blind spots, then I began to notice that a lot of what was coming up in my consciousness was like nonsense and foolishness and even stupidity and things like this. Where is this coming from? I couldn't be bothered with such thoughts before when I was trying to project this image of mature, intelligent being. And then by letting go of that, and then suddenly things that didn't make, even, things that made no sense or sounded really stupid or foolish or very childish, or would start appearing in consciousness. Now, because this, when you're growing up, you play roles, you adapt, and so there's a lot in our experience of life that we reject, that we have ways of just bypassing or suppressing and not acknowledging in any way. So I began to see that through opening the mind up, the consciousness, through non-attachment, then any kind of repression, would start, anything that had been repressed would start arising into consciousness. And so at first I was, why am I, having all these stupid thoughts? Then seeing it in terms of it is what it is. Seeing it as my stupid thoughts is still Sakya Ditti. But seeing it is, whether it's intelligent, stupid, beautiful, or ugly, makes sense or nonsense or whatever, conditioned phenomena is anicca. What arises ceases. So this is the vipassana reflection on conditioned phenomena. All conditions are impermanent. And we chant sape sankhara anicca in the every day. All conditions are impermanent. So this is a way in the Buddha style of being this awakened witness to what arises in your mind in the present. Is Buddha, the Buddha knows Dhamma. He knows that what arises ceases. There's a knowing, and then whatever that condition is, if it's sensible, non-sensible, intelligent or stupid, selfish, vain, egotistical, maybe idealistic, magnanimous, grand visions of saving the world or whatever, whether it's on the magnanimous level or the totally selfish, immature level, all conditions, that means nothing, there's nothing exempt. All conditions are impermanent, anicca. All Dhamma is anatta, or non-self. Sape Dhamma anatta. These two lines I've always used as reminding in my practice. To see this, because from this Buddha position, you see whatever it is, it's changing. If it's stupid, it's changing. If it's intelligent, it's changing. It's impermanent. And you're seeing these three characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta, not through intellectual projection onto your experience, but they're ways of looking, changing from identity and judgment and attachment or rejection to having the courage and the patience and the willingness to bear with the conditions maybe that we've feared or rejected or dread or dislike. So in vipassana, fear arises and resentment, anger, and all kinds of strong emotions, but also those are more easy to witness, but so much of one's experience is around dullness and just restlessness and anxiety and doubt, uncertainty, insecurity. So in the lust and greed and anger and aversion, they're quite stimulating. When we have, like cinema, you go to the cinema, it's usually about lust and greed and anger and hatred. Those are exciting. It's not about dullness, restlessness, and doubt. So you can see that the worldly mind is, the totally unawakened human individual depends on romance, adventure, excitement to feel alive, on gossip, on scandal. You read newspapers, why is there always some kind of gruesome facts? Why are we so fascinated with wars and fighting and torture and rape and all these atrocities and corruption? And then who's, the film stars, who's having an affair with who and things like this. Why do we care who's about them, and their infatuations or adulterous habits? Because it's interesting, isn't it? Gossip is interesting. We're interested in such things. But, painting the wall white is not interesting. That never gets in the newspaper, because you couldn't sell newspapers. But anything about sex usually, is we generally want to read that. and then atrocity and violence and things like this. So just noticing that these are stimulating, they stimulate the mind, excite the mind, interesting. But in meditation also we're noticing, putting our attention on that which is not very interesting, like sitting posture. It's not really very interesting at all, is it? Or your breath, inhaling, exhaling. You're not it's not a thrill or exciting experience. And if you've lived your life only seeking the extremities of conditioned phenomena, such as the extreme forms of pleasure or pain, then meditation can just, you dread it because it's boring, or it just makes us restless and feeling insecure. We don't know how to cope with dullness or sleepiness or restlessness or doubt, uncertainty. Modern affluent societies, one of the big neurotic problems that everybody has is around guilt and worry. People in the Western world suffer a lot from guilt. And this is an interesting one because in Asia, for example in Thailand, this is not such a big deal, guilt, because it's a different culture, and it's based on Dhamma, on Buddhist ideas and so forth. So the sense of yourself isn't connected to ideals of how things should be. So and the Dalai Lama once was asked about, do Tibetans have guilt problems? And he said, well, they generally, or do they have self-aversion? And he says, generally Tibetans like themselves. And then Thais generally like themselves. They aren't feeling that they're unlovable or bad. But in England, I know that it's a society very much that is self-disparaging. A lot of guilt haunts the culture, feeling of not being good enough. And also in my background in the States, this sense of guilt. And tracing this, even remembering past experiences where I did something that I shouldn't have, or said something, or that I shouldn't have said. And that guilt can carry through into adult life, into old age. I notice old people, sometimes suffer a lot from guilt about things they did when they were youths, when they were young. And of course, psychotherapists, psychologists, they're dealing with this all the time, with guilt and sense of self, not having no sense of your self-worth, of your own goodness, but seeing yourself always through maybe the things you shouldn't have done, through the flaws, through the mistakes of your life. And these become exaggerated. When you exaggerate a flaw, then it takes over consciousness. You can just be obsessed with what's wrong with yourself and not in any way have an inkling or acknowledge the goodness that we have. And so Luang Por Chah recognized this in me, and when I first came, and he encouraged me to think of my virtues. Well, this had never occurred to me, ever. That I've seen myself as virtuous. I saw myself always through negative perceptions, self-disparaging, guilt, and feeling of not being good enough. So this was the personality that was taking the flaw and then just looking at that and losing all perspective. Well, that's not uncommon in people. They'll see, like on the carpet, if you see one dirty spot, you can just focus on that and forget that the rest of it doesn't have any. And so Luang Por Chah said, Sumedho, you think of your virtues. And so I went back to my kuti and tried to think of my virtues. I really had trouble thinking of anything good about myself. I'm great at writing lists of what's wrong, weaknesses and things like that, but virtues, I'd never ever considered that. And even a fear of it, like it would be boasting or would inflate my ego. But then, as I began to pursue this, not to try to convince myself, from the ego level that I'm a good guy, wasn't that? But I think, why am I in this monastery? Why did I even come and ordain as a Buddhist monk, live in this monastery, a celibate life, and when I was missing all the fun that was happening in the 60s in San Francisco. And I came from Berkeley, California. So the LSD, the drug scene, everything exploded after I left into this kind of hedonistic, pleasure-seeking, anything-goes life. And here I sit in this hot monastery. A hot season in northeast Thailand is dreadful. And in these backwoods monasteries, not very good food. Why did I do that? Why would I submit myself to such things? And then I realized, because I love the good. I didn't want to just live in a heedless, hedonistic way. It wasn't that I wasn't attracted to that, but that shows a sign of love of goodness, of virtue, because if I didn't have that, I wouldn't have been in the monastery. Like all of you here at this very moment wouldn't be here if you didn't love the good or want to know the truth. So this is, this is a way of reflecting on human nature as being good, and our basic human nature, according to Luang Por Chah, is that we're good. Now that was quite a revelation when Luang Por Chah said that to me, because I realized that my American conditioning was very cynical. It was the idea that we're all basically selfish. That's our nature, selfishness. And we think of me first all the time, and I don't care about you. If I have mine, then that's all I'm interested in. This is the kind of attitude that's dominant in Western society, even to this day. And so this idea that you've got to discipline, control, reward and punish, browbeat, bully people into being good, into keeping moral precepts, and threatening them with the fires of hell if they tell a lie and things like this, because we see ourselves in the negative ways, and we can even make good cases for human selfishness and mean-heartedness and so forth. But also, you can make a good case for our basic quality as human beings is love of the good, of truth, beauty, love, goodness, because these are part of our nature. And this is where the the beauty of this particular teaching of Buddhism, of Buddhist teaching, because it isn't about seeing, browbeating humanity into converting and conforming to moral precepts. It's an invitation. It's appealing to the goodness. It's giving opportunity for good action, for dana, for generosity. It encourages us to take responsibility for how we behave in the world, in our families and in society. It's leading us on, in other words, rather than pushing us. And so this is a very beautiful way of seeing the world, of learning from the conditions that we're living in, from having the human body that we have, no matter what state of health it might be. We learn from the way it is. So each one of you, whatever your physical condition might be, seeing it from the ego level, you think, why me? Why should I have this illness or this disability when others don't? Or see it as something to learn from, to recognize the ego, the suffering you create around having an illness or a disability. Beginning to see the result of not getting what you want is like this. We as a child, when children go through that stage when they want something and you won't give it to them, they throw tantrums. And so they stomp on the floor and scream, and through that, then they try to make their parents give them what they want. And so this is, when we're adults, we don't tend to do it to show that, but sometimes we really are throwing tantrums internally, so when we don't get what we want or don't get the recognition we think we deserve, or also, being in a position that I've been in for years of being a kind of senior monk and a teacher and so forth. Then you get both the accolades and the praise, and you get criticized and blamed a lot. Ajahn Chah was always saying, learn from praise and blame. Well, praise, I on the ego level, I like that. I like praise. And I don't like blame at all. That's the ego. That's the Sakkaya Ditthi. So the praise, if you want to get on my good side, praise me a lot. But when I get criticized, then it's different. I don't like that. So seeing this, recognizing this in the position I'm in, that you're going to get both, in this state, in this position of seniority. Some people will love you and some people hate you, and then being blamed for something that you've never done or said. So, over the years, since I became abbot, remember at Nanachat years ago, Muriso remembers, and up to the present time, I've been in this position of kind of head monk. So this is, and of course, to survive in this position, you have to learn from it. Otherwise, when the good times come, you like it, but when the bad times come, you crash, you collapse in a heap, you're shattered. So, because that life is always about both of these experiences, whenever I've been under pressure, blamed for things or criticized, sometimes it's fair, sometimes it's totally unfair, then changing towards seeing it as, to be mindful of the emotional reactions I have when I'm being blamed for something or criticized. Well, that takes a certain determination, because emotionally, especially being blamed for something you haven't done, brings up righteous indignation. How dare you accuse me of that? And that is your lying. How dare you say that about me? And going on to get into this very powerful sense of indignation. It's very exhilarating too. Because you're right, That person shouldn't have said that. It's a lie. Not true, and he shouldn't. And I'm right, and he's wrong. And so you get into this very strong, righteous mode. And then by learning to reflect on that, observe it as a mental object, you see the suffering of being attached to having to be right, to being righteous. And then that righteousness always makes me want to punish the person, wanting they should be punished for telling lies and spreading rumors. They should be, beheaded maybe. Not quite that bad. You can't do that these days. But anyway, it's seeing this righteous indignation, and then you in a way you are right. But grasping rightness from the ego level is suffering. So know this in yourself. Listening to this sense of how dare you blame me for something I haven't done is not a peaceful state. It's not moving towards calm and peace, but it takes me into a very strong state of wanting to fight and punish the person who's at fault, and to make him or her admit they were wrong. You got to admit you're wrong. Or I'll never forgive you until you say, I was wrong. And they never do say they're wrong. So the cleavage goes even wider, because you just, you can't, each one digs in their heels. And so, we operate always from positions. So this way of mindfulness is learning from these worldly conditions by listening to them. It's through listening to myself being righteously indignant that I could actually detect the dukkha of clinging to that emotion, which seems so right. Once that is recognized, then the insight, letting go of desire, letting go of conditioned phenomena. And so that is the attitude for bhavana, is letting go, not trying to clean up the world, make everything right, and tidy everything up, and so that everything is how it should be, but learning from the karma you have, the way you are, your emotional habits, your physical conditions, your opinions and views, your conceits and so forth. It's learning to listen to them. That which is aware of them is not that. It's not sakkayaditthi. The bhutto, in other words, this word bhutto, is not sakkayaditthi. It is Sakyaditi if I, as Ajahn Sumedho, claim I'm the Buddha. That's Sakyaditi. But then this practice of mindfulness, this puto, is a reminder. It's pointing at this awareness is aware of, say, righteous indignation. Righteous indignation then is an object in consciousness. And so this is where, the attitude of being a witness, and the object in consciousness is a condition arising and ceasing, and it's not self. But it is what it is. So, if it's good, then its quality is good, but you're not interested in its quality, in its rightness or wrongness, but in its characteristic of change, of its presence and then its absence. So then this allows us to discern. This is where panya or wisdom start operating through us, to discern the difference, to know attachment and non-attachment. Not saying non-attachment is better than attachment, because then we're back into, comparing one with the other. It's not about that. It's not criticizing or dividing. It's recognizing. And in this state of the human birth that we're all experiencing, we're at this point where we can observe, we can discern both in our, in consciousness. The attachment is like this: attachment to desire, attachment to conditions. Sakyaditi is like this. And that which knows Sakyaditi is Bhutto, is awareness, mindfulness. And then the insight of letting go, relinquishing this attachment, relaxing it, and then we discern non-attachment. There's a discerning attachment, non-attachment, condition and the unconditioned. So in T.S. Eliot in the quartets, this beautiful, the point of intersection between the timeless with time. This point of the human individual is like, with mindfulness, we're at this point of intersection where time meets the timeless. And that point of intersection then is a mindful moment, here and now. Being awake and aware. Now, at first, that tends to be kind of fulgurating, flashing moments of insight. But this is where but actually, mindfulness and clear comprehension and wisdom is our true nature. So, as you begin to recognize it and appreciate it, then the bhavana is cultivating, developing this in the 4 movements, 4 postures of the body, with the breathing, with the work that we do, with the relationships that we have, the professions or jobs or duties or whatever, with the state of your health and emotions, so that your refuge then is in Dhamma rather than in worldly conditions or in conditioned phenomena of any sort. But recognize that we have to live in this lifespan, as our human lifespan. And this means that this lifespan is about birth and death. The physical body just gets older and older and dies. And we get sick and illness, and we have loss. We lose, at the end of life, you have to give up everything. All that is mine, the monks have a reflection, all that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. And when I first heard this one, that's really depressing, Because the ego, all that is mine, beloved and pleasing, I'll be with in heaven forevermore. That's a Christian attitude that I acquired. I don't know if it's really Christian, but it's what I heard anyway. So, if you're good, you're rewarded with eternal life, with all that is mine, beloved and pleasing. And then in the Buddhist world, all that is mine, beloved and pleasing will become otherwise, will become separated from me. Now this is a reflection, it's not a depressing thought, because it's true. What is physical death? But you give up everything. The saying, you can't take it with you. All your billions of dollars that you've accumulated in this lifetime. And so you have, if that's what is beloved and pleasing, you have to be separated from it. Or from, other people you love and all that is just part of the human reality. That this realm is a death realm. This realm that we're experiencing through the body, through the senses, is about death. And that might sound very negative, but it's not to say depressing things, but to point to the reality that this is true. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. And then the goal of mindfulness is the deathless, the unborn, uncreated, unconditioned. So, and that realizing the deathless is what we're doing with bhavana, recognizing it, knowing it, cultivating it, so that mindfulness then isn't just a kind of flash now and then, but it's the basis of everything. It's the full strength, the power of mindfulness that we take refuge in, and that's Dhamma, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. So in this talk, I hope this has some good effect on you, encourage you at least to recognize opportunity that you have here, and to also, begin to change maybe your attitudes about yourself and the world, if they're all based on the ego and fear and desire and the critical mind, because that is a definite way to create more suffering. So this invitation to not suffer, actually, and then the practicality of it is through this practice of sati, sampajanya, panya, vipassana meditation, using the four foundations of mindfulness, four noble truths. These are all very skillful, conventional teachings, which, if used properly, will always point to the deathless, towards nibbana, towards the real, awakening to the real. So I offer this for your reflection.